Electric Cafe.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Electric Cafe. Today I wanted to just pay my respects to Ozzy Osbourne, who passed away a couple days ago. I've been thinking a lot about his life, and I don't claim to be a big rock and roll, heavy metal fan. I'm, as you can see from my channel, if you've been watching my channel, you can see the name of my channel if you haven't seen it. Obviously, I'm into electronic music and the history of electronic music from the 60s on, but you know, I've always been very aware of other genres through my history. I love music so much. I think it's really important to know all the music out there so you can, get into the ones and find more of what you do like. It's almost like a process of elimination, and I think early on when I grew up in the 80s, I don't think heavy metal hit with me. And it was very interesting growing up in the 80s how much your music, how much the music that you like kind of defined your classification at school, right? Like you like goth music? Oh, you're in this group. Oh, you like pop music and you're in this group. Oh, you're like this, you're heavy metal, you're over here. Like it was almost like there was like there was somebody standing there that was saying, okay, heavy metal over here. You're in a new wave over here. Like that's kind of how it was when you're growing up in the 80s. You were just really defined by your music. And if you look at people, growing up in the 80s, like people that were into any kind of music, like you could tell by looking at them, we were not shy about presenting the persona and presenting what we were into. Like, that's where the goth look came out. That's where the heavy metal look kind of really took on another level, and just interesting times. There was two things I wanted to talk about, and I'm not here to say the great things that I've heard other people that knew Ozzy or respected his music or were big fans. I'm not here to necessarily say those same things. I just wanted to give my kind of experience and a couple things that I've noticed in his passing that kind of come to a realization. Two things that I wanted to touch on. The first thing is, so back in, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my experience with Ozzy from an outsider and not really a fan, but of course I was aware of, Black Sabbath and their music and, all the really strong songs they did, just never to my liking to where I would necessarily buy their music. But if I heard their music, it was cool, but it just wasn't my thing. Back in like 2000 or 2001, I was working at a post-production facility in Studio City, California, which is 5 minutes from North Hollywood, right on Ventura Boulevard, and it was an audio post house, and we worked on a lot of shows. The studio was probably like 5 or 7 years old, so we were still kind of. As I went in there, I think I got hired there in like 1998, and they were still kind of building their clientele, and we were starting to get some exciting, shows and things like that. But for the most part, we were doing what maybe some people consider boring, but I thought were really cool shows because I'm into, historical things, and we were doing like a lot of History Channel stuff and Discovery Channel, also like Planet, Animal Planet shows, and a lot of game shows as well. But we did things like Modern Marvels and Biography, and we did Weakest Link a little bit later on. We did a couple dating shows, Change of Heart and Eliminate, if you guys remember those. We did In Search Of, which, coincidentally sort of started the alien sort of craze on the shows, like on the History Channel. That was the first one that kind of did that. We worked on Forensic Files and a lot of advertising, for local things in LA, whether it be like grocery stores or, this and that. And we started to get a little bit of some movies here and there, but nothing big, but it was mostly some shows. And during those years, like, reality show was starting to get big. And I think we worked on a couple seasons of Brandy, which, if you guys remember, she was the, like, R&B singer who hit it big when she was like 13 or 14, and she dated Kobe Bryant and seemed like a really nice girl, but her show was very, very boring. And if you think back to like the start of reality show with like Real World on MTV, and that sort of came from, I don't know if it came directly, but it sort of came from, 101 from Depeche Mode would sort of have that reality show and following, people around. And then through the 90s, some ones popped up in there, but Brandy got a lot of popularity. But then, I was kind of I used to work I was a quality control manager, so I worked in this one room where it was also the duplications room. So when any kind of new show came in, I would, digitize the video or make copies, and so the editors and the mixers and the music guys could work on the channel if we were doing all the audio parts to the project. And so, and then one of the last things I would do is take the audio, the final product, and lay it back to the master tape, make sure all the specs were good, make duplicates, and, the last person to see it before it goes out the door, and make sure the clients were happy. And so, I was working there for a couple years, and, we were just like, why can't we get like a show that like everybody likes, like that's the show out there that's everybody's like talking about, and it's just a big hit, and it really kind of draws a lot of new customers to maybe come to our facility, because I thought we had a really good team. And so one day I was in my room, and people were starting to mill around, and people that liked rock music started saying, "Oh, we got this new show, and Ozzy's in it." And so, I put it on, and I started watching it, and a crowd started coming around looking in my window and kind of like mulling around and sort of watching what you couldn't really take your eyes off, which was the first Osbourne show. And so we got a chance to work on the first season of the Osbournes. And in fact, my good friend Matt, went on to mix all their shows and won an Emmy. And it was really a proud time for us, because we worked on the show that everybody was talking about. Like, everybody was talking about Osbournes. In some ways it was a groundbreaking show, but it was just, you couldn't take your eyes off it. Between all the animals running around, the two kind of spoiled kids they had with, Jack and the other girl, and which was, normal for being an 11 and 13-year-old kid, or whatever their ages were at the time. It was sort of natural to be, a kid of somebody famous and a rock star. So, that wasn't a big deal. But, the animals and the house and just all the things that they would do on an episode to episode basis, and they were all just kind of normal things. And that's really what made the show work, and what made the show stand out was you had somebody that was an iconic figure who was almost mythical, and he was just doing kind of mundane things, or, get frustrated with trying to change the channel on his TV and doing the dishes and picking up dog poop and stuff like that. It was just like something that was like so normal life that it just kind of changed the history of, in some ways, of TV, and just what is entertainment and just reality shows in general. And the two things I wanted to talk about that, kind of made me think of those days, because I forgot a lot about what we worked on in all the shows, and it was almost like a blur, because we just worked on so many shows per day. It was just a 24/7 facility. And but immediately when I heard about Ozzy Osbourne, I've never had his albums. I never really, been a fan of his music, although, I don't mind it. And, I like a few songs, and they're kind of staples of the early heavy metal scene, or hard rock, and back in those days. And the two things that kind of hit me when I heard of his passing was just how humble he was, and, you hear people talk about him being a nice guy and being this and being that, and everybody says the same things, and I think what made that show and what made him different was his lack of ego. I mean, and just being a nice guy, and just being a very down-to-earth person. You hear about all these bands that looked up to him, and, we're on like Ozfest, or got a chance to meet him, and, Ozzy's like really interested in asking questions about them, and getting to know them, and hugging them, and just being a very down-to-earth, nice person that is very respectful. And you think of all the egos, and if there was anybody who would have an ego, you would think it would be the person that started a genre like heavy metal, or any kind of genre that has that kind of clout that's looked up to that much, you would think they would have some kind of ego, and just Ozzy just wasn't that person. Just that's two things I think of. Just a no ego and just a really nice and humble person. The second thing I wanted to talk about was, behind every great person, you generally find that there's a really good person behind them, whether it be their parents or their kids or their inspiration or what happened in their childhood, and it drove them to be who they are. And most of the time, it's their mate, right? It's the person they're married to, and Sharon Osbourne was such a strong woman, such a somebody who would fight for him, and somebody who would correct the wrong or tell somebody how it is, or she kept his persona and his legacy and who he was as a person. She kept that like very guarded and very in a respectful way, and she fought hard for that. And I'm sure she fought hard in a lot of ways for financial things or control over his masters, and because Ozzy was very aloof and kind of does his own thing, and maybe wasn't necessarily the business savvy person. And I mean, wow, what a strong person to allow him to live his life like how he did, because she was his manager, she was his obviously his wife, and the love of his life. And just shout out to her for being such an amazing person. Wanted to say that's just two things that I really that really resonate with me, is just how humble he was. And if you could bottle up that lack of ego and that kind of personality and just give it a little bit to every artist or person out there who works in art, I think the world would be a better place, and people would people would respect art in a lot of different ways if but that's what it is. It's your kind of, you guard your work, you guard your art, you guard your feelings, you guard this, you guard that, and she guarded Ozzy, so shout out to her and respect to Ozzy. Rest in peace.
Electric cafe.